It's Thursday, February 27th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, we talk about something called the resource curse and whether or not it is hindering economic development in this province. And we're asking, what kind of economy do you want for the future of Newfoundland and Labrador? Get in touch with us. All right, just realized I turned off my mic at the end of talking there in the intro, but it's on now, and I think everyone can hear me. Three folks here in studio today. Like I said, the lines are being opened as well for that question. What kind of economy do you want for the future of Newfoundland and Labrador? Lots of stuff to think about there, right? Looking at the resources for our economy, looking at just tariff threats ever present in the news, looking at the green transition that's happening. There's lots to talk about. So here with me in the studio, we've got a sociology prof from Memorial University, Laurie Lee Oates. How you doing?
I am grand, and I'm so happy to be back here because we were saying earlier, this is my first time in studio since before COVID.
It's been years. And because me and you were in contact professionally through talking about shows. You've been on the show, but there was a weather thing, so it was by the phone. So it's nice to have you back in the studio.
Thanks for having us.
Then we've got Bruce March here, Master's of is it Employment Relations?
Yes, Employment Relations.
And you're also a graduate research assistant working on a little thing called CURSed, how the resource curse manifests in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Indeed. Yeah, no, it's really exciting. I've been able to work with Dr. Oates, kind of help her in the research, engage in various things, literature review. It's a lot of fun. It's an important topic, too.
Why for you?
Well, I think it's an important issue for me. I think, it's at the core of, our province, our economy, everything. I think it's kind of an overarching issue that sort of, impacts everything. Obviously, it's going to impact many jobs in the province. It's going to impact the economy. And, having, good research on, how, all of this interacts, what we're going to move forward with, hopefully. It's important, good academia, you should inform, good policy, good governments. And that's why I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah. Context is important. Facts are important. Discussion around it all, and how we feel, it's all important. Jude Benwell, what do you think?
Gwe, hey, I'm so happy to be here. What do I think?
Lots of stuff.
So many things. And you really nailed it when you said that, important conversations and really having deep conversations with people is why I'm here. So I work for an organization called Neighbors United, and we have a kind of a beautiful campaign happening. I'm working on the community organizing side of it, but I also have a team of people out right now who are really asking our neighbors, how does the oil and gas industry affect you? How does the cost of living affect you? And how do you feel about the future of oil and gas in Newfoundland?
And correct me if I'm wrong, deep engagement organizer with Neighbors United, is that it?
I'm the community organizer.
Community organizer.
Yes.
All right. Nice. Stop ripping stuff off of websites. Random websites. Why did you want to get involved with that?
So I grew up in an Indigenous fishing family. I've always been really close to anything that concerned the environment. I feel really passionate about the fishing industry. I feel really passionate about our choice to be able to have traditional jobs in Newfoundland. And as a young person, I'm really, really concerned about climate change, but I'm also concerned about, are we going to have sustainable long-term jobs? Are we going to have ways that young people can leave university now and go out and make a solid living, especially one where we don't have to do rotational work. We don't have to leave for weeks at a time and come back. I grew up, in the 90s where families had whole parts of their families missing because they had to go away to work. And I love that about Newfoundlanders. I love how hardworking we are, how resilient we are. We have always been really good workers, and we always will be really good workers. But what are we working on? Can we have jobs and industry in Newfoundland where people don't have to leave their families?
Great points. And we'll dig more into that through the show. Thank you for kicking that off. Professor Oates, I mentioned resource curse, right? And we talked about this on this show a couple weeks ago as well. We talked about extracting, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's oil and gas projects, whether it's rare earth minerals. Hit me up with the Coles Notes. That's an old reference at this point. Like Bruce, do you know when I say Coles Notes? Do you know what I mean?
Vaguely.
See?
I'm more of a Spark Notes type of person. So
Yeah, I think Wikipedia is probably the modern version.
So yeah, I definitely won't say give me the Reader's Digest version then, but that's what I want though. Tell us about the resource curse.
Okay, so the way I look at it, like I remember my teacher in Mrs. White in Newfoundland culture when I was in high school, and those were the days when we still studied Newfoundland culture in high school, asking her students, we've got all these resources. Why can't we make a go of it? We've got fish, we've got oil, we've got forestry, we've got hydro, we've got mines. Why can't we make a go of it as a province? And the older I got and the more political economy I studied at Memorial University, and the more political economy I studied when I went away to do my PhD, the more I started to realize that it was resource economics and resource dependence that were actually holding us back. And there's a whole body of literature dating back to the 1970s. They started studying what they called rentier states, rentier income states that depend on royalties for economic security. There's a whole body of literature that shows, and we knew this even in the 90s when I was manager of policy at the St. John's Board of Trade. Resource economies don't perform as well. The feeling at that time was because the royalties were taken by governments and squandered by governments. But there's also the issue, it's easier for governments to depend on royalty revenue, right? It's much harder to build up your population, right? We're talking a lot about productivity right now because we're in the middle of a leadership race nationally. And Mark Carney in particular is talking about improving Canadian productivity.
Yeah, productivity has been in decline for the last couple of decades, right?
And Canada's a resource jurisdiction too, right? We're a very rural country. There's lots of northern spaces with resources in them. And, we've got to deal with the fact that one of the reasons our productivity is so low is because we depend on natural resource royalty revenue rather than investing in our people. So rather than putting money into education, rather than putting money into healthcare, rather than putting money into daycare, and yes, I know the federal government put money into daycare, but there's still lots of problems with that program.
Federal and provincial did, but yes, but the problem is that there's not enough early childhood educators, there's not enough spaces, so it's like money was put into it, but then the planning, people have taken issue with the planning. Okay,
and the execution.
Yeah.
So, we've decided as a country, as a province, that we're not going to invest in people. And in lots of ways, the services have been pulled back, right? I mean, Carney talked about, he really respected Paul Martin. I mean, who did more to make cuts to services and increase taxes than Paul Martin did when he was prime minister. And we've been on that path ever since then. And, it's been shown internationally in what we call the Asian tiger countries, right, which is Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, and China. You invest in people, and that's how you best develop an economy into the global knowledge-based economy. Then you start bringing your resources in from the outside as tax revenue rather than taking it through rentier incomes. But it's harder to do. It takes more creative vision.
Yeah, thinking for an example, right? You mentioned South Korea. South Korea is about the size of the island of Newfoundland.
Right.
It's got, it was 50 million people. Mm-hmm. Not a whole lot of natural resources there, but they're a G20 country. Right? Mm-hmm. I think 13th maybe or somewhere in that ballpark. They make ships, they make semiconductors, they make flat screen TVs, they make cell phones, and more. right? So like just to give you an example of what like when you mentioned an Asian tiger, that's some of the stuff that's being made, and they're bringing like they're not mining in South Korea, but yet they're pumping out a bunch of ships. The only one beating them are the Chinese in recent years, right?
And you mentioned something really important there then. They don't have natural resources,
Yeah.
right? They don't have a choice
That's
but
the thing.
to develop their people. So that's the curse, right?
And speaking of education in South Korea, yes, and fine. This is I know a little bit about the country because having lived there and having my in-laws there. But for example, the importance of education there when it comes to the university entrance exams. Everyone writes it across the whole country, and during that time, I think it's like a 3-hour exam. So you have parents like outside. Some folks, if they're Christian, they're praying. They're all like really worried about how the young folks are going to do because they see this as the rest of their life. And during that time, airplanes are not allowed to land and take off in the country because no, they need quiet for the test. I mean, so this is an example of just how important education is seen there. So if you have a country like that, and then you're looking at whether it's Newfoundland and Labrador or Canada, and the resource curse that you're mentioning there, how do you think we should look at changes, or what are people saying about changes that you're talking to?
So, and we're living in a time right now in Newfoundland and Labrador when massive amounts of money have been pulled back from public education, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, our public education system was the envy of the country. We to the point that we had free tuition at one point. And that was the period of the greatest economic development in Newfoundland and Labrador's history under Smallwood. Smallwood put money into Memorial University. He put money into trade schools. He put money into vocational colleges across the province. During Smallwood's time as premier, incomes in Newfoundland and Labrador increased by 300% and the population increased by 40%, right? Education is the number one path to development. We've been going in the opposite direction on that, right? And, I know Bruce was involved, for example, with the Students' Union at MUN, and you would have been part of that generation that saw that massive rollback in investment in education.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just like, for my involvement at MUNSU, obviously we're right there on the forefront. MUNSU still is talking about it. And it's an important issue about, the kind of rollback of funding to Memorial with, the 5-year phase out of the $68.4 million operating grant, which, has been cut away, and the subsequent, tuition hike that came from that. And, kind of how the, provincial government and the university admin kind of bats blame back and forth. But what really is important is that, this is going to make education, a lot more inaccessible. You have people having to take on, more jobs to pay for things. We saw, yes, there was a grandfather clause in for existing students, but for new students the next year, we saw, a doubling in the case of international students. And, it's, we're really pricing people out. If we want to be investing in, our province, our economy, then, these are the policy decisions that we, shouldn't be making. Ultimately, as Dr. Oates said, education is really important. As, exemplified example of South Korea, how you said about, the planes not being able to land during the entrance exams. We need to be prioritizing education here in the province as well.
Yeah, also every year in the news, there's always a story of a kid who slept in and the police give them like an escort to school, like with the sirens on. It's like, no, they're going to be late for the exam. You're like, are you? It's pretty much like a yearly cliched news story at this point. Jude, when you're out like through folks with Neighbours United, if we're talking about the current economy or the future economy, this is a lot of the work that's being done. What types of things are like your colleagues saying, or what's the conversation like with people? Because like I know you're not you folks don't advocate. You just you listen and you talk.
Mm-hmm. Listening is really important. I think that a lot of Newfoundlanders don't get to talk about their lived experience. They don't get to talk about how the oil and gas industry is affecting them, how it's affected their families. A lot of times what I'm hearing in the community, to go back to young people, I'm hearing, I can't pay my tuition without working for jobs. I can't afford to live away from my parents. The fact that young people now just dream of their ultimate goal is being able to live outside of the home is really concerning to me. And we're seeing more and more concern also from seniors. We talked to a lot of seniors. I talked to one woman in particular whose husband had worked in the oil and gas industry. And she said essentially she valued that their family was able to live as what they considered middle class. Of course, he had already retired like 20 years prior, so that wouldn't be this economy. But how he had missed so many of their children's birthdays, and he had missed Christmas, and he had missed all of these important moments, including sometimes even the birth of his children. They had a very large family. And now, as a senior, even after their family had been supported by the oil and gas industry all of their lives, herself as a senior could not afford to buy groceries. She was on a fixed income, and she felt like they had worked their whole lives towards an industry that at the end of the day, when her husband was older and no longer able to work, did not care about them. And we're hearing a lot of stories like that. It's really heartbreaking, the idea that we have, as Dr. Oates has put it, we are resource cursed, is something that really resonates with a lot of people. If we have so much oil, if we have so many things that we can offer, why are so many people unemployed? Why are so many people struggling? And what happens when when their labor is no longer able to be extracted?
Folks, this is The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. If you want to join if you've got thoughts on the discussion as you listen to it, open for input and thoughts on that. And the question we're asking, what kind of economy do you want for the future of Newfoundland and Labrador? 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206, thesignal@cbc.ca. So we every day when I do, like after the show every day, I record what's called a promo, and that airs on The Go and the morning shows, and saying, hey, here's what we're doing tomorrow or whatever on the Signal. When I did that yesterday for today, I got an email this morning from Everett, and Everett sent me a note. And this was something that he wrote back around 2019, and it's supposed to be like in the form of an advertisement. It was political notes for around the election back then. It says, industrial development NL style, wanted. Someone to break into the house tonight. No problem as long as I get a job loading the truck. I'll even help with the truck payments and clean up after they're gone. And he said you may find that helpful. So that's on the subject of resource curse, what we're talking about today. And, I mean, he's joking around a bit, but also a bit serious. What do we think about that?
So, and that's the other thing, and Jude's kind of alluded to this too, right? Like resource labor is really hard labor.
Yeah.
Your reporter Jenna Head did a really good story on this recently, right?
Fantastic work.
Jenna was one of my students in media and politics and Newfoundland politics, and a product of an excellent memorial education she is. She wrote this golden handcuff story about the challenges of rotational work, and the challenges of having your husband away for 2 and 3 weeks at a time, it's high income kind of when you're young and you can do the hard manual labor, but you get dependent on the lifestyle, even though it's a really hard lifestyle, and it gets really hard to get out of it, and then it becomes like a golden handcuff. But it's not an easy way to make a living, for sure. Any more than the fishery was an easy way to make a living, right?
So I'm sure people are wondering about, if we're talking about this thing, the resource curse, and saying, well, it leads to less investment in education, other bits. It also it costs a lot of money to run Newfoundland and Labrador, right? From the hospitals to the roads to the fact that, like, you look at the growing tech community, tech sector we have here, that's worth it keeps growing every year. There is government investment in all of that, and without natural resources, where would we be? Because you have to have something in order to invest. And we talk about South Korea. The Americans are a big part of the reason for the jumping off point. And yes, there's a discussion around something called the Miracle on the Han and how that place developed from the 70s through the 80s and onward. But you do need something to start it with. So how does that apply for Newfoundland and Labrador?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point because obviously, throughout the province's history, we've always, kind of had this kind of reliance on natural resources, especially when we're looking at, oil and gas, for example. We think of the example of, throughout the mid 2000s, and up until, 2015, it really was a boom to the province during the Williams years. I mean, you saw the provincial coffers, flush with cash for the first time. There was, some investments that were going into education. There were tax cuts too, but, it was like a relatively good time in the provincial economy. But, ultimately, that isn't sustainable in the long term. These sorts of, economies are prone to, international markets, the sort of boom and bust cycles. And, as we, transition away from that, we're going to be left with, stranded assets in the form of, offshore oil.
Yeah, that's a word. I mean, you look at Alberta, right? Like if you talk about stranded orphan wells, and the damage that can be seen there, and it can be a discussion here as well, of course.
Mm-hmm. No.
And if I could pick up on that, right? We've done this before with the COB moratorium, right? And one of the reasons we struggle so much as a province right now was because so many young people left after the COB moratorium. It was close to like 60,000 people, I believe, and they were between the ages mostly of like kind of 15 to 35. So that was a whole generation of taxpayers that left, right? Because we depended on a resource that collapsed. Now, it's pretty obvious we're heading towards an oil collapse again in the future because of the Paris Accord and the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and everything. It's pretty clear we've got to make a turn on fossil fuels, and there's major investments in electric vehicles, and, people are not going to be burning gasoline as much anymore. So we do have to prepare for when oil and gas collapses. And CBC has done some excellent journalism on how we are absolutely not going to, Patrick Butler, right? He does really good work on this. We are absolutely not going to be the last barrel of oil sold in the world in this jurisdiction. And it's like the last time I looked, it was like 11% of our annual revenue was oil and gas royalties. I think it's projected to be 15% this year. And we are not preparing for the time when that money is not going to be there.
And the latest, still from the International Energy Agency, they're still looking around 2030 for peak oil. The latest from them was from this past fall on that outlook. And even with the increase in consumption, they're still saying they expect that to be the time. We will have to see this fall for this year's report and what, if anything, has changed with the change of the U.S. administration and with Donald Trump's government and everything else. But as of this fall, that is still the projection. We've got some folks waiting patiently on the line, and everyone, the lines are open. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. What do you want to see for the future of this economy for Newfoundland and Labrador in these times we're living in? Ben Oates. Ben Oates from yesterday. Ben Oates, how you doing?
Not too bad, Adam Walsh. How are you?
Good. Goodbye. Thanks for calling.
Long time no talk.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so what I do with younger folks, which is yourself is one of them, and Bruce here too, I get you to be a guest, and then you listen to the show, and then you call in. It's a really good method of getting callers. What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts, first of all, thank you to your panel. I'd like to pick up on something that Dr. Oates said about education and the resource curse, and I agree with it in principle. All I'd say is this, is that Newfoundland has been a resource extraction economy since, Europeans first showed up on the shores. The problem that we have is we have a lack of secondary industry, right? It's a pan-Canadian problem, really, in the sense that we just extract natural resources, but we don't have the refinement and production capacity here, right? So the question is how are we able to, let me rephrase this. What's our next step in getting that kind of secondary resource production capacity here, in the sense of how do we get steel mills? How do we get factories? How do we get chemical plants? How do we get X, Y, Z? Because that's where the money is, right? We've always been on the wrong end of the value chain, in the sense that if the price of a barrel of oil collapses or the price of a quintal of fish collapses, we are in a hard way. So how do we capitalize on that? Because that's where the money is.
And we did have a massive industrialization program in the 1950s, right, under Smallwood, and that failed at that time, largely because of the space that we were in the, I guess, on the globe, right? It was really expensive to kind of ship products out of here. So we were never going to develop a strong manufacturing industry. And I would suggest to you that like manufacturing is not where it's at anymore, right? I mean, the United States lost all its manufacturing to China a long time ago. And we evolved even after that into the service economy. I mean, Newfoundland actually did do fairly well in evolving its tourism industry as the service sector started to grow. Right now, what we should be looking at is knowledge sectors, right? And you talked a little bit about the tech sector growing. I mean, if we were really, I mean, it's almost like if something like Verifin happens, it happens by accident. It's like it happens in spite of government policy, not because of good government policy. So if we're really serious about moving into the global service economy, or knowledge economy, we'd be putting money into incubation centers. We'd be putting money into research and development. We'd be putting money into education.
And we do have, incubation centers. So that we have Genesis, right, at Memorial University across the Parkway here. There's Bounce as well. And I know Econex has got another incubator that it's launching. I think we're going to hear more, hopefully, on the show next week about that. So there's stuff moving, and government is investing in that. Or are you just saying there should be more?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ben, are you still there? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm still here. I'll say this, is that I'm an engineering student. I'll be graduating in April, and me and all my classmates are facing the same kind of crunch where, like, you know, we have this education, and it's been good to us, but we have nowhere to deploy it here in the province, right? So we're really looking, like, I did my last 2 work terms in the renewable energy sector. I was working on a wind to hydrogen project. That's all well and good. But, you know, without a place to put the employment, what good is education?
Well,
right?
And that's why you need the incubation centers and more money invested. Like Russell Williams in the Department of Political Science says the only jobs we create in this province are for men with shovels digging things out of the ground. We got to get past that, right? And we've got to build these knowledge and service sectors in a way that we haven't. You know, and I'll believe, you know, that we're serious about competing with China, because we're hearing a lot about China right now, right, winning the trade war. I believe we're serious about competing with China when we're putting as much money into education and innovation and research and development as China is. You know,
good luck with that, though, right?
I mean, one of the things I've been saying, like Ben talked about clean energy and wind energy, and I've been saying for years, like, we needed to prepare for the green transition by putting money into green energy research and development. So we wouldn't be just bringing products into transition to green energy here. We'd be developing products that we'd be selling globally as everybody transitioned to green energy, which is exactly what China's done, right?
Judy, you want to jump in on this?
Yes, I just wanted to say that, you know, I grew up in the 90s. I graduated in 2010. Back then, my entire high school, none of us were believed we're going to go on and we're going to be doctors and we're going to be lawyers. It was very much, I was from a small rural town where, much like every generation before me, we were believed to be people that were going out and doing these really hard labor jobs. And I just want to say to young people out there, especially those that are going to graduate soon, is you're allowed to dream bigger than that. You are not just people whose bodies can pick up a shovel, as you said. We are, even though Newfoundlanders work hard, we are more than hard labor jobs and jobs that are very extractive. We are creative. We are smart. And I feel like our industries, the future of our industries, is much more than just working in industries that are going to take people away from their families and wear their bodies down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. Ben, you still there?
Still here.
All right. Any final thoughts before I let you go? I got 2 other people to get to.
No, I'll let you guys go. Thank you to the panel for taking my questions, and all you have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for being a guest yesterday. Thanks for calling today. Talk to you later, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
No problem. Take care.
All right, we've got cheers. We've got Philip on the line from Notre Dame Bay. How you doing, Philip?
Oh, pretty well, other than a cold. But I've been farming out here for 45 years, and I've built up Campbellton Berry Farm. And I've managed to eke out a living here by adopting the philosophy of Newfoundlanders. Here's where I want to be. Here's where I'm going to stay. Now, what can I do to make sure I do? And doing things that are necessary to keep me in one spot. So in 1980, I built my house here. At that time, oil was running out. By 1978, there wasn't going to be any. And so I built my house completely round because a sphere has the least amount of surface area and loses the least amount of heat. I half buried it because the ground temperature is much warmer. I heat with wood only. And I've done farming here. What could I grow? Well, strawberries were a high-value crop that I could grow and market here. And I wanted to market locally, so I made it U-pick. And I've been here for 45 years. I've taught. I've worked in geology. I have an engineering background. I enjoy the arts. And the latest project for me is Exploits Island sheep. And I'm trying to bring them back because they survived on exploits where there was very little for them to eat, except the wild grasses and maybe kelp off the beach. And they produced wool, which was really good for mitts and sweaters. So I've got the last of the sheep here. I'm trying to bring them back because I think they're very much a part, at least in principle, of this green revolution that we have to go through.
Yeah.
We have to deindustrialize because those sheep will produce a fabric. My son, unfortunately, has had to go into the oil industry in order to have enough money because our economic system is topsy-turvy to be able to survive. He's been told, don't wear acrylics and artificial clothes because they'll catch fire and melt and do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
He's been told to wear cotton and wool. And I don't know if you've ever tried to burn wool, but it certainly doesn't burn very well. It's one of the warmest things you can have. The fishermen used to take their trigger mitts and throw them in the water before they went fishing because they were warm or wet than they were when they were dry. There's lanolin in it, and lanolin, if you ask any pharmacist, is an amazing material. And I'm looking at these sheep, and they're looking back at me, chewing, and they will treat me with affection. So here's a factory that produces an amazing range of products that will take grass and convert it into wool, milk, lambs, all sorts of fantastic products, including lanolin. There's the factory. Yeah. What do I have to build a petrochemical plant in order to clothe myself? And the wool will blend into the environment. It won't end up in the Arctic as little scraps of plastic. It blends in. So our industries, whatever they are, have to work in harmony with nature. And the Aboriginal people that lived here and the first settlers here knew they couldn't survive without their sheep. And that's just one example. So I think the resources we have are a blessing, not a curse. And we have to look around us and say, what is it we need? If we need food, shelter, clothing, it's all here. And it's here in a form which we reject. You know, people will reject sheep. They don't like the smell. They don't like this, that, and the other thing. But they are the source of our wealth. And just look at the language that has come from that. You know, whether it's William Blake's Little Lamb Who Made Thee, the whole analogy to the Christian faith, the lessons that learn in caring about each other, on and on and on. And that's the direction that we have to go with our industries.
Philip,
they have to be in harmony.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all those points. I always appreciate the call, and there's a lot there for us to unpack now in the discussion. So as always, thanks so much, and good luck with everything with the wool and sheep.
Thank you.
All right, cheers. Philip there, Notre Dame Bay. Before, so let's everyone, if you've got thoughts on what Philip was saying, we've got the pin put in there for 1 second because I've got Daniel Griffin on the line as well now, and then I'll go back to the folks in the studio. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. You sent me a note because you're Jude's colleague with Neighbors United, and I saw the great note, and I was like, gosh, I'd like to hear you and your voice talk about it. So when you're out and about talking to folks about climate change and the cost of living, tell us about more about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what people are telling you.
For sure. A lot of thanks for inviting me on, by the way. A lot of what we do is hold space for other people to share their experiences with us. So we share ways in which, we felt that certainly the rising cost of living, which a lot of people want to talk about, and the effects of climate change have affected people we love or our lives. Like I talk about witnessing the snowstorm in 2020 and kind of being shocked and I guess thinking it was funner when I was, it was a few years ago. I was a bit more able-bodied and still am, but I guess I realized that my neighbors, particularly my elderly neighbor in particular I'm thinking of, who had mobility issues, had trouble getting out of the house, and me and a friend, as I saw a lot of people doing, helped out. And it made me kind of confident that who ends up helping out in these disasters, it's mostly community members.
Right.
And so we share stories like that. We ask people if they've had similar kinds of experiences. So we talk to people about, the summers getting hotter, if they felt that, and what they feel like the impacts on their lives, being able to go to the cabin as much, the ice not freezing for as long as it was before. And so these little changes that people have noticed, we kind of ask about their experiences and ask how they feel going through those experiences and now kind of looking back on them. And so the goal is really to help people kind of process what they really value. And yes, how the oil and gas industry has benefited some of their lives. And we talk about good stories that they've had, positive impacts. And we also talk about other things that they're interested to see the industry do better. And so most of what we do is sharing stories. We don't talk about politics. We don't really talk about parties. It's a lot about just seeing where people are at and what their concerns are, and then trying to ask people if we think our elected officials and people with more power should be having these kinds of conversations in public.
So for the folks you're getting the stories from, what do you think, what does that do for them?
Yes. So one of the main, I think, feelings that people convey to us is a sense of kind of powerlessness, that they feel that they're kind of trapped. They see the benefits that oil and gas has brought to some, not all, but they're also concerned about climate change, most of them, and so they feel torn. And so I think one of the things we do, kind of services or a gift, I've heard people call it, is just basically asking people about their experiences, listening non-judgmentally, because we're not criticizing people's experiences and what they draw from their experiences, because people are experts in those experiences. And so it's really about listening, because a lot of people say, why do you even want to know about this? And so it's an attempt to kind of indicate with this feeling of powerlessness that maybe collectively we have a bit more power and a bit more say-so in what the future of the province looks like and how we're going to factor into it. So it's mostly, I think, a kind of container for producing more hope, I think, looking forward instead of kind of looking back or trying to cling on to a single industry and hoping that it won't leave, and then when it does, worrying what now?
Feeling heard, being seen, it's powerful stuff. Daniel Griffin, thank you very much.
Sure.
Dana
Thank
Griffin
you.
there, Defend Our Island campaign and manager, Neighbours United. Guests here in studio, we've got Jude Benoit with Neighbours United as well. Bruce March is here, Masters of Employment Relations candidate, and Laurie Lee Oates, professor of sociology. Thoughts?
So I think both of those callers hit on something really important, which is community-based solutions.
Yeah.
And a lot of the solutions to the climate crisis are going to be at the local level, although we do need, the hour is so short now, we need governments to provide leadership and funding and things like that. But, your first caller talked about agriculture. We need food security with the coming climate crisis. So absolutely, we should be developing, local food here and, doing a better job of that than we have been historically.
And we have massive food security issues in Newfoundland and Labrador. Plus, and I mentioned food insecurity, high rates of that compared across the country as well. Yeah.
And, we need more. We need to be more community-minded generally, right? We need better designed communities with infrastructure that is suitable to withstand the climate crisis. We need walkable neighborhoods. We need public transit. We need rooftop gardens, right? We need more green spaces. We need more bike infrastructure, cycling infrastructure. We need more pedestrian areas. How popular is the pedestrian walkway downtown in
St. John's,
summertime, right? And we need sharing of resources and like things like lawnmowers and tools. These are things communities could be sharing. And that's, a solution to the cost of living crisis, too.
Jude, what do you think? Any thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. My role with Neighbours United, we talked a lot about deep canvassing, and Daniel just touched on a lot of that. But a lot of what I do is just connecting people that are concerned about climate change, about the future of industries, especially young people, with each other to kind of try to build a community. Not to say that I started the community has always been here, but to help facilitate it in a way where people are talking about these things. And I think one of the biggest things that has come from it is the idea that people are feeling more powerful. They are feeling like, I've been listened to and I have been given space to talk about how I feel about it. And now I want to take the next step towards what do I want to do about it. So we do everything in the community organizing program, from teaching youth how to do grant writing so that they can do environmental events, to pairing them with older community organizers so that they can share knowledge. And I think that that's really, really important, because at the end of the day, it is community, and not just community in an urban way, but also in rural areas. It is community that should be deciding, do we want to invest more in agriculture? As I said, I grew up in a fishing family, so the farm story really just, that way of life really appeals to me. The idea that we have so much of what we need right here, and we're not, I don't think we're investing in that enough. I think that we should be looking at how we can take care of each other, how we can look at food insecurity, how we can look at climate change solutions in community.
Yeah, I mean, to Philip's point, right? Like, there's oceans of plastic out there. We're trying to get off of it. The climate crisis, the crisis of plastic in oceans, and to have more local thought on what can be done is an important conversation. And the work you're doing, do you look at, like, it sounds to me like it's also an act of democracy input. Of helping the system. If you're motivating people, if people are being heard, that is working within a system to help further the strengthen democracy. Do you look at it that way?
I kind of look at what we do as everyone across parties, across class, across different cultural backgrounds, all of it, everyone cares about the future of our industries. Everyone is worried about climate change. Everybody's worried about cost of living. I haven't talked to a single person who isn't. So at the end of the day, it's really what we're doing applies to everyone.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, which is all part of it, right? Part of building community, part of having healthy, engaged, maybe even at some points thriving communities. Right? Bruce?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And kind of when you get at this idea of community and kind of, how people believe certain things and, people's ideas about, how our province, how our economy should be. Obviously, in the province, there's this sort of deep sense of pride surrounding, the history of industry, the history of our natural resources. It's, invoked in sort of patriotic and nationalistic framings by politicians, a lot of times. People, are aware of our history as, a resource economy. So obviously, when you try to pitch them the idea of transition, it can be, kind of a troublesome.
Yeah, when you're proud of the work that you've done and it's put food on your table for years, the way we talk about it matters.
Absolutely, and I would just like to highlight that any just transition, any sort of remaking of our energy system, of our economy, should include the people that have supported it in the past, have these transferable skills to move into the new economy, the new industry. I think that's really important. But I'd just like to highlight too, we sometimes frame this as like, we go down one path or we go down another. And, that's sort of the case, but we don't really have a choice. I think what's most, telling for me is, there was a report from the Canada Energy Regulator that projected that, Newfoundland and Labrador offshore oil production will peak by the early 2030s, as you mentioned earlier, and, could disappear entirely by 2050. If global net zero is not achieved, offshore oil production will still drop by 99%. Even with no new climate projects, production will still fall by about 80%. And, when we consider, the kind of the cost of, these extractive industries, economically speaking, NL is going to be left with, a lot more vulnerable to these price declines. So, we have to start, planning ahead. We can't just kind of pitch our hopes on, continuing business as usual. This will happen. What really matters, though, is, how we work it to our advantage.
Yeah, where are we going to be with it, right? What happens when that time gets there? Because, gosh, I was like, what year is this? 2025. Right?
I ask myself that all the time.
We are 5 years away from 2030, and if the forecast is accurate, right? And then the bit from the International Energy, from the Association, anyways, the IEA, says clean energy momentum remains strong enough to break a peak in demand in each of the fossil fuels by 2030. Demand for energy services is rising rapidly, led by emerging and developing economies, but the continued progress of transitions means that by the end of the decade, the global economy continued to grow without using additional amounts of oil and natural gas or coal. That's from this past fall, right? So this is the latest I could get on it. This is where we are. We'll see the update in the fall or whenever it is of this year for where things are going out. And you two are doing research coming. So we're talking about the future, right? And you're talking about past 2030. And to Jude's point too, we're going around talking to people, listening. When you do research nowadays, how has it changed from the way it used to be?
So I had the good fortune to be trained as an imperial historian, and a really important aspect of research right now is to decolonize research, right? And we have all kinds of things at universities like ethics processes and stuff right now. But when I did the application to SHRC, the Social Science Humanities Research Council, for our Insight Development Grant, one of the things I put into it was money to go to Labrador, to the Labrador campus, and money to go to the Corner Brook campus to get outside of St. John's. And we'll talk to people in St. John's too, but to do consultations on what people in the communities want to see researched around this. And, I'm particularly interested in talking to Indigenous persons about like kind of of land displacement for these resource projects, like Muskrat Falls was obviously highly problematic. You know, a lot of mining takes place in Labrador close to Indigenous populations. And we really need to, I've already been in touch with the New Natsivut government, and we're reaching out to the Hollywood First Nation now. I really want to talk to Labrador land protectors about like what they think needs to be researched on these issues.
Yeah, because back in the day, you'd have academics go into a community and be like, hi, we're researching blah, 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 blah. Talk to a bunch of people, do whatever, and leave. And there wasn't a whole lot of, well, there was none or no real actual consultation of what would you like us to research? Can we listen to you more? What are the ethics around this? I mean, there's been a lot of problematic stuff over decades and decades and decades. We're talking about colonialism here too. So this is some of the newer ways of like having folks be seen, heard, be part of what's happening.
Absolutely.
Right. Jude, any thoughts on that?
Oh, so many.
I know.
As an Indigenous person, I am definitely aware of our history and ongoing present of extraction when it comes to doing research. And I think that Neighbours United, what we're trying to do is really center Indigenous consultations into what we're doing in community. And I hope that everyone that's currently doing research in 2025 is doing the same. So thank you to Dr. Oates and her team for saying that. I think that that's extremely important. I think when we talk about community and building trust in community and really listening to people, that it's obvious that you need to take a decolonial approach.
Yeah. And then as your research goes on, like what's the timeline around this with the grant and with what you're doing, the conversations you're going to be having? Is there a timeline?
It's a 2-year project.
Yeah.
It started last June, and Bruce has been working on a literature review since that point. The other thing I want to mention, another group we're reaching out to is young people through the Youth Climate Corps. And young people have gotten a really bad deal, particularly because of climate change, particularly because of education costs, particularly because of housing costs. One of the things I'd like to see happen, particularly, is we're looking at new climate policy now as we move away from carbon pricing, is investment in giving money to young people to go out and do projects that will help us adapt to climate change, that will help us respond to climate emergencies and help us build affordable housing and rooftop gardens and all those kinds of wonderful things that need to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see them get a living wage to do that.
And, it's so important to be, at least in my view, that to do this sort of on-the-ground stuff, this sort of community-based stuff, because obviously, knowledge for the sake of knowledge is important. Academia is important. I myself, I love learning about things, reading articles, writing. It's very important. But, I think, the things that we do should be used to facilitate and power the future and directly have an impact on, our community. It's one thing to, do some research, write a report, put it on a shelf, feel proud about ourselves, pat ourselves on the back, But, I think, good research should,
have impact, right?
Have an impact,
the
exactly,
QE2
right?
is full of reports, some of which have been looked at and others not so much, right? But if you're doing stuff with impact, that actually is with folks in community who you've listened to, who've listened to you, and there's actual movement from it, that's actually meaningful.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And I think that should inform a lot of what, academics do. It should. More and more we're seeing it does, but it hasn't in the past, unfortunately.
So there's I'm going to go for final thoughts here because we only got a couple of minutes left, but for your, to be there, how old are you?
I'm 24.
24 years old, right? How does that feel to be you in this point, in this wild point in history that we're in, doing this work though? Like you're trying to do work that matters.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a blessing, and I'm very privileged to have this role, to have this outlet, to be speaking to you here now, to be doing this research, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity that Dr. Oates has given me, and it's really important. When I think about where I am in my life, where I want to see, the future go as it relates to, our province, our country, our economy, everything. I think the idea of climate change, especially people in my generation, is a real existential dread. Like I have real conversations with people about, people are, deferring, home purchases, can barely make ends meet. People talking about, I don't think I'm going to have kids because, I'm
they're scared about the future, right? They're worried about what's happening.
Yeah, the world that we're bringing them into. And, I think it's just tough for a lot of people because, at the end of the day, the material conditions matter, our environment matters. And, you want to make sure we have a world that, has a bright and prosperous future. People can thrive.
Let me 2 seconds, wrap it up, because I got to go to these two.
Yeah.
Final thought.
Yeah, no, and I just think, all of that's really important that, that's why it informs this research.
Jude, 15 seconds.
Oh my. I will leave it with, if you feel like you want to share your story, if you want to create change, if you're feeling after listening to this that you would like to go to the Neighbors United website and sign our petition, or contact me through that webpage as well, or through Jude at neighborsunited.org. I would love to hear you out. I would love to listen to your story.
5 seconds, Lori.
Thanks for having us. It's really important to be out talking to the community.
All right, thanks, folks. That's it for today. Thank you. Tomorrow, we're taking a break from everything. No news. It is Trivia Day with John Gushu. Trivia heads, pass the word around. It's a week early, but that's tomorrow. Cheers.